I sat down for a morning meeting this week with Gwinnett County, Georgia firefighter and certified financial planning candidate Matt Broom. Matt is firmly on the path towards financial independence and has great advice for others on how to do a financial size up to see where your resources should go. I hope you enjoy it. All right. Hey, Matt, welcome to Bullpen. Thanks for meeting me.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, same here. It was a cool way that we met each other. It's kind of a interesting way that our paths crossed, and we share a lot of the same vision. We have a lot of our things are in perfect alignment. Why don't you just share how you found me, or we kind of connected?
Yeah, so I've had the idea of starting a podcast of my own for some time, and so I've always been a huge consumer of podcasts. Well, I finally got around to just doing it, and I started. It's called the 2448 podcast, and one of the guests that I came across was a gentleman named Ben Vernon, which I'm pretty sure most of your listeners are probably fairly familiar with.
We love Ben,
and we did an excellent show together. His story is just incredible. And I always end every show with, "Hey man, do you know anybody else that you think I should talk to?" And he knew that I had a serious interest in personal finance and long-term investing and all those kinds of things. And he was like, "Boom, I got your guy. You gotta talk to Kyle." And I immediately reached out. I tried to join the FIREhouse group on Facebook. I didn't know it was internal page at the time, but I was just psyched to talk to you. And it kind of led us to do an episode on my podcast together, which I'm going to send you that audio file and you can do whatever you want with it, share it with your listeners. And now it led us to doing this. So I've really enjoyed collaborating with you so far, and I'm looking forward to doing some more things in the future.
Yeah, same here. And Ben is one of those guys who's just like universally loved on our fire department. He's just a great guy. He and I came on together. We get along great, and he's like firmly on the path towards financial independence. So I'm just like very stoked for him. You mentioned your podcast 2448. Why don't you tell our folks a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the 2448 podcast is really all about finding success in and out of the fire service. I don't know what y'all schedules are like, but here in the Southeast, most fire departments work 24 on, 48 off. And quite often that 24 hours on bleeds over into our lives in some good ways, but a lot of bad ways too. We take a lot of stress home with us. It impacts our families in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things that, we need to shore up to live a full life. And the fire department is just a part of that. We're all multifaceted. We're firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, husbands, wives, fathers, daughters, sons. We're all these different things, business owners, whatever it is, podcasters. Everybody's got so many pieces to their life, and the fire department sometimes can consume the rest of those things. And I'm not saying that the fire department shouldn't be a big part of your life, but you've got to, have a comprehensive perspective on your life and not let one piece take over. And that's kind of what it started. So I actually try to spend that same ratio, 24-48. I try to spend about a third of the podcast talking about, fire service related issues. And I try to spend about 2/3 of it talking about money or mental health, physical health, just things that impact us on and off the job.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. We talk about trying to maintain that work-life balance, and sometimes in our line of work, that's extremely difficult. And it's not only hard on us and the people we work with, but it's hard on the people here at home. And it's important to try to keep those things in mind. Who in your podcast and on your podcast, who has stood out? Like I know Ben has for sure. Who else has stood out as somebody that really impacted you in a positive way?
This episode hadn't released yet, but I recorded a podcast with Ben's doctor, Dr. Mark Foreman. And geez, what an incredible guy. He psychoanalyzed me there on the podcast. And it was a very intense conversation that focused totally on, psychological aspects of being in law enforcement and public safety in general. And just an incredible conversation that I haven't been able to get off my mind. And that has probably been the most impactful conversation for me, just because it was a lot of the conversation hinged upon some of my, desires with the podcast. We got into a very deep questioning of what I was doing with the podcast, why I was doing it. And he's obviously a great question asker. And it made me kind of sit back and think, because it's the same questions that we have to ask personal finances. Why? It's very important to have a why. And he questioned me very deeply on that. So that conversation, it will air next Tuesday, I believe, which I don't know when this will come out, but that'll be, I don't know what day that is, June 20 something, it'll come out. And the conversation was just fantastic. I really enjoyed it. He was a great guy, and he kind of challenged my thinking in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Knowing your why is like, knowing your purpose. Why are we doing this? What's speaking to us that's leading us down that path? I think once you kind of figure that one out, it makes a lot of other stuff pretty easy. So that's cool. I'll be looking forward to hearing that podcast for sure. And I know everybody listening here will be doing the same thing. So thanks for that. Well, you ready to get your first alarm going?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's go. So here on our fire department, a first alarm assignment is 4 engines in a truck. But here at the firehouse, I'll ask you 4 questions. You give us 1 piece of advice. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, cool. So on your first alarm, you're going to be first in. So I need to size up. That's who you are, where you work, and how long you've been doing it.
So name is Matthew Broom. I have been with the Gwinnett County Fire Department, which is a suburb of Atlanta, just north of Atlanta, for the last 6.5 years. I got hired with the fire department the day I graduated from college. So it was like I walked across the stage, I got a phone call, boom, you're hired. And that was pretty much it. You know, I wasn't one of those guys who grew up knowing that I wanted to be in the fire service. So I got into college and I was studying economics. And I don't know what you do with an economics degree, but whatever it is, I didn't want to do it. So the fire service seemed like a good alternative. So
Yeah,
I
you know,
started
what's
looking
funny
into
is my wife got a degree in economics, and now she does design work. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, economics is a pretty wide ranging topic. And it's something that I read a lot now. I like the behavioral side of it a lot more, which I think pertains to our job significantly. So I've been able to take some of that and apply it to the fire service, which I find pretty interesting. But I got hired and I went through, recruit school. And I had an interest in personal finance from pretty much a very young age. I mean, if you're from the Atlanta area, Clark Howard is like the personal finance guru around here. And I can remember my parents listening to Clark Howard. I actually got into Clark Howard at a young age. So, I mean, I'm like 13, 14, 15 years old listening to Clark Howard on the radio, which is probably kind of weird for most teenagers.
Uh,
And while in college, I knew I was dating, my wife and my now wife. And I knew that, where that was heading. And I had some student loans and this and that. And I stumbled upon a guy named Dave Ramsey just cruising through the radio one day. And if you don't know anything about Dave Ramsey, he pretty much lays the foundation to reach financial freedom from a debt freedom standpoint. Because I honestly believe that's the first step to financial freedom is debt freedom. So day one, my wife and I got married, which was right after I finished recruit school. Like the week after I graduated from recruit school, we got married. The first weekend of our marriage, we sat down and did a budget and laid out a plan to pay off our debt. I know that sounds pretty exciting for first weekend of marriage,
yeah.
but it was so fantastic for us to lay that groundwork for long-term financial success. And the amount of stress that we feel around our money now, 6 years into it, is like we discuss money a lot, but we don't really have any stressors around it because we have a long-term plan in place and we're happy going along that path. And when things come up, we deal with them and we move on and we focus on the things that are really important to us, which is spending time with each other. She's pregnant with our first child, things of that nature. But so I had all this going on in my head when I showed up to the fire department. And I'm kind of a long story to get to the point, and I sat down day one, we're going over our benefits package and they say, hey, we don't have a pension anymore. So we have a 401A and a 457B. Here's your investment options. Fill out the paperwork. Let us know what you're going to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I look around.
Yeah.
And nobody knows what the hell to do.
Right.
And I'm not saying that I knew at the time either, but I did have an above average understanding of some of the stuff just based on my education, my personal interest in it. And right then and there, like I just felt this feeling in my gut, like this is not right. And these are folks who are coming into a job where the norm is to serve the public for, 15, 20, 30 years And the old way of thinking was like, you do that, we reward you with a pension. Well, that's going away. So it's now, it all falls back on personal responsibility to be able to retire well one day. And the fact that they weren't getting any help just made me sick. Like to this day, I can feel that feeling in my stomach. Like I'm getting it right now, just talking to you. The fact that these guys had no education around how to make a decision like this, not even like the basics of trying to figure out, well, how much might they need for retirement, and then figuring out how many years that is away, and then figure out what that means today as far as how much they need to actually be putting away. Just
Right.
basic, time value of money calculations was
Yeah,
never discussed.
never, never, ever. And the pessimist in me, Matt, thinks that that might be intentional. Like if they can keep us in the dark, they can kind of steer us towards products that really don't serve our needs. And I remember having that exact same feeling. And we were actually able to finally introduce a financial literacy to our recruits in the academy. The last academy was the first one to receive it. It's something I'm really proud of. It was put on by one of our members who had a really strong background in finance. And I just think we set them up for such better success if we can get them started early. It's like you and your wife having the conversation about budgeting early on in your marriage. It's just going to set you up for success long term. So I just really love that.
Yeah. And at the time, I didn't know what that was going to mean for me. I had a lot on my plate. I was brand new at the job, a lot to figure out. I was in paramedic school. I went straight from becoming certified as a firefighter and AEMT straight into paramedic school. So I had that on my plate, and I got done with that, and I came out to the field. And, the first 2 years, it's like a whirlwind trying to figure out the job. And maybe it was about a year after my wife and I got married, we paid off all of our debt. We had $25,000 split between 2 credit cards, student loans, this and that, just little things. And our first year of marriage, we paid off every bit of debt we had. We were renting an apartment at the time. And at that point, I said, okay, we were still following the Dave Ramsey plan. We saved up our emergency fund. And then I started thinking, okay, well, what are we going to do for long-term investments? I've got to figure this out.
Can you just
I don't
explain?
know.
Sorry, can you just
Yeah,
explain for people that don't know what an emergency fund is? Can you just explain to them what that is?
sure. And an emergency fund is basically, I like to view it as insurance actually, because it keeps you from having to deal with chaos head on, per se, because most people view an emergency fund as having 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up. And a lot of people were like, oh, well, I'd like to have, I could use that cash for better things. But if you think about it like insurance, you pay for insurance. So an emergency fund is a very liquid fund. You could keep it in just your basic savings account, high yield savings account online, or a money market account. I prefer a high yield savings account online for the FDIC insurance. But you can keep it in something like that you can get access to when you need it. And when something breaks, the car breaks down, your roof leaks, boom, you got it taken care of. Like you don't have to stress about where that money's coming from. And that helps you sleep at night like nothing else. Like I can't find a better sleeping pill than having an emergency fund. So that's kind of like your basic, like foundation for financial success is removing chaos from your life so you can focus on gaining ground in other areas. So
Yeah,
that's what the emergency fund is all about.
that's
Just having.
perfect. I have a little AFFF on the emergency fund that I'll link above. But something that you mentioned that I want to just circle back to is you mentioned keeping that emergency fund in a high yield online savings account versus just in the bank. A couple of things with that, which I do myself, which I love. I keep a good portion of my liquidity or cash in an online savings account, because it has a higher yield, right? It gives you a bit better interest rate than you would just get at your average bank or credit union or whatever like that. On the other hand, I also keep a little bit just in a normal savings account at the bank that I can access immediately. So if it's a true emergency, if I need it today, I can pull it out and have it right now. The online savings account, it takes a day or two to process. So that's just something that's important for people to understand.
Yeah. And just for the listeners, I actually don't use an online high yield savings account. I just use my regular savings account because exactly like you said, I like having quick access to it if I need it. I can pull it up my phone. I can see my checking account, my savings account. It's all right there. And like I said, I don't mind paying for insurance, and that's what I view that emergency fund as. So I'm not trying to optimize that for a return necessarily. It's there for when I need it, and I want it to be there when I need it.
Yeah, perfect.
But moving on from there, we got to where we had 6 months of an emergency fund saved up, and it was like, man, we had paid off all of our debt. We had this emergency fund saved up. It was like we had reached the top of this mountain. Then we got to the top and saw like, oh well, financial freedom's start away. So we got to start climbing this mountain. We didn't reach the top of it yet. We just kind of crested a hill. And at that point, I had a fairly good understanding of the different retirement vehicles out there, but investing was still kind of this unknown. I didn't know a whole lot about individual investments, mutual funds, ETFs, all this different kind of stuff. There's a lot of lingo out there that can get very confusing. So I decided, you know what? I actually called a guy who was a financial planner in my area, and I told him a little bit about me, and he said, you know what, you'll be fine. And what I didn't realize at the time is that he didn't want to talk to me because I didn't have $1 million in the bank. And because most financial advisors typically get paid off for what's called an assets under management basis, meaning, somebody retires with $1 million in a 401k, they roll it over into an IRA, the advisor manages it, and they take 1% of it. And that's your fee. You don't actually have to pay them directly. So they don't want to work with you if you don't have assets to manage. And at the time I didn't have any assets to manage. I was looking for a partner to sit down and come up with a long-term plan for my financial freedom. And the gentleman didn't want anything to do with that, which, I get it. He's got incentives to pay the bills. So
No, for sure. And can you just expand on the difference between somebody that's getting paid fees for managing your assets versus just a pure fiduciary?
sure. So there's a lot of confusion within the industry as far as fee only versus fee based versus commission based and all these different things. So, and they can all call themselves the same thing. Somebody can label themselves a financial planner, and they could work for a brokerage firm. They could work for a fee based firm. They can work for a fee only firm. Personally, I work for a fee only. My company is a fee only firm. By law, I have to be a fiduciary 100% of the time. Whereas a fee based firm, you can pay them a fee for your advice, which is supposed to be unbiased advice. But then when it comes time to do your investments, they can take off their fiduciary hat and put on their, brokerage hat and sell you a product and earn a commission. And by and large, they have incentives to sell you certain products because they earn more money that way, which, it's just the way the market is set up. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, which is just full commission, which is, your brokerage houses that are selling investments, they earn a commission off of that. So I'm not saying one way is the end all be all. I do believe that the fee only fiduciary model is the most unbiased of them all. But people have been taken advantage of over and over again by the industry, by these fee-based folks who are selling products while also calling themselves a fiduciary. And there's a lot of regulatory issues going on right now as far as the SEC. And I'm involved with an organization called XYPN, XY Planning Network, who is actually suing over something called Regulation BI, which we won't get into today. But it's kind of going over all the stuff that, if you call yourself a fiduciary, you shouldn't be able to earn a commission.
Mm-hmm. Because there's too much conflict of interest there. If you're earning commission, the natural tendency is just to want to steer people into products that raise the amount of money that you're going to receive. It's just a natural thing. So what you're saying is just making perfect sense.
Yeah. Well, incentives are very strong. They pull us in a lot of ways that we don't even realize it. If you want to listen to somebody who knows the power of incentives, look up it was a talk by Charlie Munger, something about human misjudgment. I can't remember the name of the actual talk, but he talks about incentive bias in there, incentive cause bias. And it's very true. And the financial industry is riddled with incentive cause bias when it comes to selling investments. So it can be very difficult to understand whether or not when somebody tells you they are a fiduciary, then they go to do your investment plan, they sell you investments that they are making a large commission off of, and you don't know, the difference. So those things can be not in your best interest. But if you go to napfa.com, they actually have a checklist, like a 10-question document that they suggest you take to your financial planner, advisor, whatever, and ask them those 10 questions. I can't remember them off the top of my head. Maybe you could link to it, but it'll pretty much, they have to answer the questions truthfully on how they receive commissions and everything else. And it'll let you know what kind of advisor you're working with.
Sure. And that's, say the name again.
NAPFA, NAPFA, National Association of Personal Financial Advisors.
Perfect. Yeah, good. Yeah, no, that's perfect. And hopefully in that list, and I will link that here, it'll be just really straightforward questions that people can go and take to somebody that they want to just bring in on their team and say, listen, these are some things I need to have answered before we proceed. So yeah, I really like that.
Yeah.
So sort of pivoting a little bit, what do you think is happening? National events, okay,
Sure.
with the coronavirus, with civil unrest and all the things that's happening with that. How is that impacting the economy? Are the fundamentals still there, or are we in for a long-term downward slide here?
So this is a conversation that I have with folks all the time because it's always top of mind. And I don't act like I have any type of crystal ball or any type of foresight into the long-term viability of our economic engine, because we can't even predict the weather tomorrow. And there's a whole lot more factors that influence our long-term economy that they, once they start playing with each other, it's very hard to predict. So I don't try to predict the market or economy or anything of that nature for any period of time. It's largely a loser's game, and that's my personal opinion on it. But what I do focus on is, and I think we might have discussed this when you came on my show, is the circle of influence versus the circle of concern, which is a idea that Stephen Covey talked about in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It is a great framework to view the world. And the circle of concern, the economy falls squarely within it, because we are all concerned about the long-term viability of our U.S. economy as well as the global economy now that we're so interconnected. But one individual is not going to have a huge impact. Me and you aren't going to change the direction of Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, all these huge companies. The S&P 500, that kind of stuff. But the things that we can control is our personal situation. And that goes back to, do you know how much you're spending? Doing a budget. Do you have an emergency fund? Do you have a plan to reduce your debt? Do you have long-term investing goals? And once you start coming up with those things, your circle of influence actually starts to grow, which Covey describes in his book. But it all starts to focus on the things that are right at hand. Because if all you do is, sit around and stew on what Trump or Biden or the civil unrest or, coronavirus is doing to the economy, you're not taking action on your own personal goals. And working on your own personal goals is going to be much more impactful to your personal well-being than worrying about the economy will ever be.
Yeah, that rings really true. And that's in the same sort of realm as the Stoic philosophy of, just controlling the things that you can control. I used to have a coach that would always tell us, control the controllables and don't worry about anything else. And I've taken that philosophy and passed it along to my kids. Say, listen, guys, we can't control that you got to sit here at the house on a computer to try to go to school. But what we can control is the amount of effort that you're putting into it. And in that way, it's really empowering, right? Because you are taking back control of your environment, of your life. And I think that's just a universal truth that everybody is going to really understand.
Yeah, the controlling the controllables pretty much sums it up as focusing on that circle of influence. If you stay within that circle, you're going to end up much better off than staying in the constant stressful place of the circle of concern.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a broad term. It's a broad principle, not just in terms of your finance, which I agree with 100% wholeheartedly, but it serves to reduce the level of stress just surrounding our crazy life, which I know you talk about a lot on 24/48. So I just love that.
Yeah, well, it applies directly to the fire service as well. There's a lot of things that we can't control in the fire service, but we like to sit around and complain about them. And it just doesn't do us any good. So
yeah, but that's like our favorite pastime is
yeah.
what's the saying? It's like firefighters are only happy it's something like only happy when they're complaining or only happy when they're upset or something like that, man.
I
I've
do
definitely
enjoy
followed.
complaining, which, I do plenty of it myself. I'm always up for a good debate. So,
No question. No question. That's cool. If sort of looking back, Matt, when you came on or even before, is there anything that you would have done differently, or are you happy with the path that you're on?
so I am quite happy with the path that I'm on, but it doesn't mean that looking back, I don't feel like I could have done things better. And it kind of goes back to where I left off with that story of getting into investing. I had this, the first thought I had is if I'm going to learn how to invest or learn about investing, I need resources. And obviously Google is a great one, but the library I found was the best one. And I hadn't been to a public library in, I don't know, since I was a kid. And after I got off the phone with that financial advisor who didn't want to, anything to do with me, I said, you know what? I'm going to go to the library, find a book, read it. I'm just going to sit down and read everything I can. And I walked into that library this day, and this is, as a 25 or 26-year-old man. And I walked in and I created a library card, an account or whatever. And this feeling came over me that's like, oh my God, I can learn anything I want in this place. Like it's just filled with knowledge. And it was that realization that I was like, it made me feel like I did college completely wrong because college was just an obstacle at the time. It was something that I felt like I had to do, even though I enjoyed learning about economics. I particularly enjoyed the microeconomic aspect of it, but it was just a hurdle. I didn't follow my interest and curiosity like I do now. And, as you can see behind me, like I've got a pretty nice bookshelf back there that those have all been read over the last 3 or 4 years because I've just had this insatiable curiosity that college doesn't satisfy for a lot of people, but it actually sometimes actively works against that insatiable curiosity. But if I could go back and do it all over again, I would try to change my perspective while I was in college to follow my interests and curiosities a little more, and just read. I'm a huge reader now, and
What are you reading?
I think from currently I'm actually reading a book about design, which is kind of weird, but it's just a principles of design. And it's actually just a reference book actually it gives you an overview, like stuff like the 80-20 rule. If you look at your computer screen, there's a toolbar at the top. There's only 20% of the, functions in there that you use for 80% of the things on your computer. But if you dive deeper, there's, a lot more on your toolbar. So it's just little principles like that. But then they link to kind of the seminal works. So like you can start looking up educational papers on the research done behind these different design principles. And that was something that I stumbled upon while I was doing reading on a blog called Farnham Street, which if you're not familiar with Farnham Street, it's run by a gentleman named Shane Parrish, who is basically just a student of Charlie Munger. It's called Farnham Street because that's where Berkshire Hathaway, the address is on Farnham Street. And he's taken the mental models that Charlie Munger is a huge proponent of, and he's basically turned into a blog format, and it's fantastic. And I came across that design book on there and immediately bought it on Amazon.
Oh,
That's what I've been reading.
my wife would love that. With her background in design, she's got her master's in architecture. I think she'd just be all over that. That's cool.
Yeah, let me grab it. I got it right here. Universal Principles of Design.
Here we go. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's something that you talked about earlier, Matt, that I want to just go back to real quick is, I was asking if there's anything you would try to go back and do differently. And it dawns on me, the thing that we're talking about is that's not something that you can control, right? That's not a controllable thing. But what is in your circle of control is the fact that you can learn from it, right? The fact that you can improve from it. And yes, some of those things are obstacles, but obstacles is how we grow, right? Obstacles is the way that we get better. And I think of it in terms, we have tons of wildfires out here. California dries out, brush just goes up really easily, and sometimes we get into these huge, real big fires. And I think of it in terms of that, like the fire is pushing through all these obstacles, and it's just using all that as fuel to improve and to grow and to get bigger, right? I think of it like that. So every obstacle that you had to overcome has gotten you to the place where you are today. And while you can't change the past, you can improve on. So I think that's an important thing to think about.
Oh yeah, and that's what, looking back on that, that kind of, I don't want to call it a regret per se, but I use that as fuel now moving forward of actually reading things that are extremely difficult, like things that I don't understand, but I hope to understand one day.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of mental struggle, that obstacle that keeps you sharp mentally. And you got to apply that kind of thing to your life in all sorts of ways, financially, physically, mentally, whatever. You got to always challenge yourself. Um,
No,
it
I
the
agree.
obstacles make you stronger the whole way through. You're going to be, there will be some that really knock you off the path, and find your way back is going to be tough, but once you get back on it, you will be a more qualified individual for it.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's like weight training or something. You need that resistance to grow, right? You need that in order to improve. So it's a little bit of a mindset shift that, yes, I have this issue going on right now, but I will get past it. I will learn from it, and I'll get better for it. So with that, Matt, what would be one piece of advice you could give firefighters, first responders, anyone that would be listening to this sort of show? What's a piece of advice you could give them?
Sure. So long-term financial freedom all starts with awareness. You have to have a good understanding of where you are today to figure out a path to where you want to be. So that starts with doing a financial size up. You have to sit down, you have to do a budget, you have to create a net worth statement. You have to do these things that are foundational to figure out where you're at today. If you are constantly spending more than you make, you're never going to reach financial freedom, because you're on this hamster wheel of go to work, spend money, go to work, spend money, go to work, spend money. And it's never invest, it's never save, it's never build wealth. So first you have to sit down and just do a very difficult analysis of where you're at. And if you're not in a good place, you've got to be okay with that, and then come up with a plan to improve. I find that a lot of folks, they don't want to sit down and do a budget, or look at their statements and put them all in one place and come up with a net worth statement, because they'd rather just keep it in the dark. And things that sit in the dark start to grow mold. So we don't we don't want that to happen. And so it all starts with awareness. And a really well-known financial planner, Carl Richards, says budgeting equals awareness, and it's true. The Doing a budget, your cash flow is the gasoline that's going to drive your financial engine forward. So, making sure that you are spending less than you make and use the difference to, put it towards your long-term goals is the start of heading towards financial freedom. And a lot of that's, once you've kind of sat down and you've developed that awareness aspect of it, you've got to actually create those long-term goals. What does that mean for you? Currently with, a lot of fire departments are going away from pensions. So like I said earlier, the responsibility totally falls on you to be ready to retire. And personally, I view retirement as a backup plan. I'm 30 years old now, so I might view that different later, but I want to have the option to retire one day. Hopefully I'll be able to continue working in some capacity. But if you don't have the option, what does that mean? That means you definitely have to continue working.
Yeah.
So you have to create some long-term goals. And once you've created those long-term goals, you come up with tactical objectives. So it's just like we show up on a fire scene. First thing we do is we do a size up. We see what we got. You have to do that with your financial life. We do a walk around. We get a better idea of where we can make entry on this house, where we can have the most impact. Where are we hurting? Like, if you do a financial size up and you realize you have a whole bunch of credit card debt, boom, that's a fire. You got to go put that out. So you figure that out on your size up and walk around. And then, on a scene of a house fire, the goal every time is to put the fire out. But there's tactical objectives that go along with that. So if your goal is to retire one day, well, there's tactical objectives that go along with that. Debt freedom, making sure you spend less than you make, creating an investment plan, doing all these things, paying off the home. That's one of the biggest ones, is paying off the home, because that is a huge expense. And if you don't have to pay for your home in retirement, that goes a long way for optimizing your cash flow. And once you've kind of done that size up and walk around of your finances, you've created long-term goals with tactical objectives. It's just about behaving for a really long time.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I love the financial size up sort of philosophy. And it's also important to note that we don't just do one size up and then we're good. No, a size up is a continual assessment of your environment. And you have to go back and readdress these things and find out what's working and what's not, and then deploy resources towards the thing that needs help. right? So
Yeah,
if it is reducing your debt, you need to send your attack line to reducing your debt. If it's increasing your cash flow or it's increasing your income over here, well, you need to send an exposure line over there, right? So the parallels are
exactly.
really, really familiar to people that are going to be listening to this. So I think that's just fantastic. Um,
Yeah.
and I think,
In my personal life right now, my wife and I were pregnant with our first child, and like that's causing us to increase our emergency fund. You know, we could have some outsized medical expenses that we don't see coming associated with that. So like, we're diverting our attack lines over there. We're increasing our emergency fund right now because, our family's growing, which means the opportunity for, an emergency could go up. So you constantly have to reassess those things, reevaluate your goals. And, once you've set your tactical objectives, just do what you got to do to get it done.
yeah, no, I love that. And I think, Matt, with that, man, you got knocked down on your first alarm.
Cool.
Right on. So if people are looking to learn more about you, you mentioned your 2448 podcast. Where else can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so my financial planning company is called Forward, like moving forward, Forward Focus Financial Planning. You can look that up at forwardfocusfp.com. Also, the 2448podcast.com. You can find that across any of the major podcast apps. You can reach me at both of those websites. I'm always happy to start a conversation and help in any way that I can. When it comes to the financial planning aspect, you don't have, if you have a question, you don't have to be a client to reach out. Like I'm here to help. So if any firefighters out there have a question or need somebody to bounce ideas off of when it comes to their long-term financial success, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to have a conversation. And if anybody's interested in coming on the podcast, I'm not real picky with, if somebody's interested in coming on, just give me a shout. Like I'm more than happy to sit down and have a conversation with somebody. I honestly believe that everybody's experiences in their life are their own, and there's valuable lessons to be learned from that. So if you're interested in coming on the podcast, the 2448podcast.com, reach out to me there. I'm more than happy to have you on and discuss whatever is on your mind. So
Yeah.
those
No,
are
that's
the
awesome,
two
man.
best places. Then across social media, I think on Instagram, I am Firefighting Fin Planner. On Twitter, Fire Fin Planner. And you can find me on Facebook just as Matt Broom.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate it, Matt. And it is evident that you're not too picky with the guests on the show because you have yours truly on there. So, I agree with that, man. And hey, listen, I want to really thank you, man. This has been fantastic. I know people watching this are going to just get a ton of value out of it. So yeah, really appreciate it.
Good. All right. Thanks, Cal.
All right, thanks again to Matt for meeting me here in the bullpen. His message of focusing on your circle of influence is a powerful one, and it helps us control the controllables. It led him to crushing $25,000 in debt off a $50,000 income, or a 50% savings rate, which is just outrageous and perfect alignment with the fire community. So well done to him. If you'd like to learn more about Matt, you can find him on his website, forwardfocusfp.com. The 2448 podcast are on Instagram, firefighting_fin_planner, on Twitter at firefinplanner, or on Facebook at Matt Broom. If you'd like to learn more about us, we're on Facebook at the Firehouse. That's f.i.r.e.house. On Instagram, the _fire_house, or on LinkedIn, the Firehouse Investors, or any place you get podcasts. If you like this and you'd like to learn more, please like, share, and subscribe. But no matter what you do, take this information, go out there, and get some. Station F.